Hi, my name is Nicholas Stanchov. I'm here in Latvia and I represent the Europa Consortium. We are a group of companies and authorities from Portugal, Italy, Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, and Latvia, working on a energy performance subscription service, which is really an approach of using energy performance contracting under the hood. Why under the hood? Because energy performance contracting is kind of a complicated concept, and it's also quite specific. And what I'll do today is just very briefly tell you about energy performance contracting, in not so much in the sense that most of you know it, and there's a lot of information out there, but how we can use it today to help owners to renovate their buildings. It applies as much to public authorities as it does to individual owners. The issue with building renovations is that it is the most insecure decision somebody can take. And it's a decision that you only take maybe once, maybe twice in your life. You can redo your apartment, you paint a room, but to actually renovate a building, the roof, the basement, it's a very scary thing. And what we found is the best model to help owners is a model where there is a guarantee for many years that whatever was done at the beginning is going to continue to serve. And the important thing here is the word to serve the owner or the resident in terms of health, in terms of safety, and in terms of comfort. Let's start with health. Today, when we renovate a building, if we don't think about ventilation, we're spreading COVID. It's that simple. And that is one of the reasons you're seeing upticks in COVID across Europe, because people are spending more time in poorly ventilated buildings. Let's talk about safety. Then safety. If we don't have good roofs, well-built balconies, they collapse. People are dying in Europe from simple accidents regarding poorly renovated buildings. And finally, comfort, the main reason, what immediately is useful to owners. If you renovate a building properly, it is more comfortable. All these three things together have a fantastic result. They increase the value of the building as well as the health and comfort of the owners. The main issue we're facing today is how do we get sufficient financing at a scale and at the speed that will allow us to renovate the millions or billions of square meters that need renovation. The EU would like to see us double the amount of renovations that are done every year. At the same time, they're well aware that deep renovations only reflect about 0.2% of all the renovations done in Europe every year. When they say double, they want to double deep renovations to 2%. In other words, a tenfold increase. This is going to create a huge strain, both in terms of capacity to actually deliver and a huge strain in terms of financing, unless we can reduce the risks. So I'll be showing you a slide as to how we reduce those risks. But first, how would we make it, the financial flows work? The first step would be to ensure that SMEs and large companies alike can have access to working capital, so that if they guarantee that they're going to meet a certain number of targets of what a deep renovation means, and as I mentioned earlier, it means safety, health, and comfort guarantees for 20 years. So that is a very serious undertaking. These tasks can be standardized, especially in the cases of large buildings, such as public authority buildings or multifamily buildings. Secondly, they will need to be able to have access to these funds, not just for a little while, but over the next 20 years. We have billions of square meters that need to be renovated. So that means that they can't have these buildings for 20 years on their balance sheet. So they get the working capital so as to be able to do the works. But once they finish the works, if they have met the requirements of the targets for safety, health, and comfort, then they need to be able to offload the cost, the financing that they have put into the building to someone else. And that's where we get a long-term financing alternative fund, which will buy the future cash flows of the payments that will be made by the owners, be it a public authority, or be it a residential building, or be it an industry, for the works and the services that they're going to be receiving for the next 20 years under the guaranteed contract, be it an EPC or a subscription agreement. And that way, the companies can now go back, get more working capital, and do more buildings. And if and when they start having the capacity and they've gone down the learning curve, they can not just do 1 or 2 or 3 buildings a year, but maybe 5 or 6 buildings a year. And we start getting closer to the tenfold increase of deep renovations, which the EU requires if we're going to be energy neutral by 2050. Especially if you think about it, since 2014, central governments were supposed to be renovating 3% year on year of their own buildings. I don't think a lot of central governments have done that. And therefore, we have an overhang that needs to be caught up just to be to where we're supposed to be in 2021. And it's only getting worse. So let's look at risks and rewards in the next slide. How does this translate concretely for owner, a business, and financiers? The most risky part for a company is trying to get a client. Out of 10 times, only 1 or 2 result in an actual contract. So that's a waste of time for companies. The most risky time for owners is the minute they've signed with the company and until the time the work is finished. Everything can go wrong. Cost overruns, time delays, poor quality of workmanship. But that's also true for the company. They may start a renovation and discover that there's a latent, what's called a latent defect, too much water running around the building, which is breaking the foundation. Or maybe whereas they thought fixing the roof was just changing the surface, they discover the beams need to be changed. Price increases. Just in the last year, prices across Europe have increased between 30 to 100%, even 400% for certain metal materials. So all of these things together make the execution of the work the most risky time. On the other hand, once the work is done, and if it has been done properly, risk drops drastically. And as you see from the graph in front of you, we've mapped this out. In red, you see risk. So you see for the service companies, denominated here as ESCOs, but it could be any building company. Huge amount of risk at the beginning. Then you see the risk slowly decreasing as the execution of the work is done. After a period of time, once the work is commissioned and before we can really say the job is finished, because when you finish the works, there's always what's called a snag list, little things that are still not right. But at that point, if the work is done right again, there's very little risk. And that's where you see over the word labif, the next 15 to 25 years. At the moment, we say it should be 30 years. I'll come to that last. Meanwhile, if the risk has come down, on the other hand, what are the rewards? Well, what we say is the service company, in here we're looking at the last part of the screen, the returns should be very high for the company all the way through the execution. Why? Because they're taking the most risk and you should be compensated for your risk. At the same time, once the work is done, but we want the company to continue to provide us with service, they should continue receiving a return. Returns for 2 reasons: managing the contract and the services and paying for the maintenance. You want to maintain your building for 20 years. That means you may have to repaint. That means maybe a wall has a small break because of a branch smashing up against it. That means calibrating your ventilation system, reviewing your roof, cleaning the roof. All of these things would be the responsibility of the service company for the next 20 years under the guarantee that they're providing you. As a result, they get funding during that entire period until the end of their contract. At the end of their contract, the owner not only gains all the savings of all that period, including a real estate value increase, but then also the amount of money they were paying for the services provided by the ESCO. However, of course, they will then need to maintain things themselves, which is another cost. And perhaps we could adjust the rewards with a small amount of decrease on the owners after the 20-25 years. But as you see, the whole concept is to allocate the right risk with the right reward on part of the execution, and the same thing later on the payment. You had a brief introduction as to the tool that we're using, which is this idea of allocating the right risk and reward and providing guarantees to the building owners. And as I said at the beginning, this process, which we're discussing under the Europa Consortium in several countries, but also in another project in Ergodom in Poland, Slovakia, Bulgaria, Romania, and Austria, is not just for residential buildings, but for public authorities as well. The key of what you saw and the reason it's so standardized is because everything is standardized. This is the whole idea, is to be able to leverage a similar process across Europe, to leverage the fact that today in most countries in Europe, we are in harmony from a regulatory framework point of view. And we have analyzed now in over 10 countries in Europe, and there's no difference in terms of implications from a legal point of view. From a public authority point of view, this approach is very useful because it allows for third-party finance. And with a Eurostat approved contract, which Latvia has, for instance, you can then finance the project without hitting the country's debt ceiling, which means that we can renovate a lot of buildings very quickly. In Austria, for instance, the state real estate agency is applying the concept of using these kind of contracts for the long term, and we're discussing how we could do their refinancing. So the goal of this is to create as many of these contracts on the same standards so that we can lower the cost of financing, lower the cost of managing these contracts. You should know that in general, a service company preparing such a subscription agreement, be it in Europa or an EPC contract, as it could be called on a standard basis, they spend between 30 and 40% of their time managing the contract, which that's wasted if we have a process that's both standardized and online, which is what we're delivering in the subscription service of Europa. And what this will allow is to do more projects faster and more efficiently, as well as providing more quality. And most importantly, because we have a digital platform, there will be accountability. We'll be able to track whether really we have the results or this is just greenwashing. So I really hope you have a great interest in our tool, and I'll be glad to answer all your questions next week. Thank you.